And good morning, everyone, and welcome live in the studio to Small Biz Matters, the half-hour program where you work on your business rather than in it. My name is Alexi Boyd, and I'm very excited to be welcoming the first in a series of educational programs and working with our very fabulous guest, John Shepherd. Thank you very much for coming on the show today, John.
Thanks for having me, Alexi.
Now, John, you are, of course, the Assistant Commissioner and Small Business... No, wait, let me say that again. We were talking about whether or not this would fit on a business card. Assistant Commissioner for Small Business and Single Touch Payroll Program Lead with the ATO. Now, today's program is going to be all about Single Touch Payroll. It's new, it's happening, it's an exciting new development with the ATO, and I know from our discussions earlier that you're working intensively with industry groups, with other areas of the government to get this rolled out and to get small businesses in particular educated on what their requirements are. Now, speaking to small business around the place in my role as a bookkeeper, but also just chatting to people about all these changes, is it really as big and as full on as, do people need to be scared, in a word? I mean, how worried should people be as to whether or not they're going to get it right or how difficult it is? What's your feedback been from small business?
Look, our feedback's been really positive for those, particularly those that have started reporting. Importantly, we've had a really positive start. Those that have 20 or more employees needed to start reporting from July. And I'm pleased to say we've got around 43,000 employers already reporting, covering something like 2.8 million employees.
Well, it's a fantastic rollout, a real success. Yeah. Has it been a program of real education, getting out there, letting people know through your key people like your accountants and your bookkeepers, obviously, to inform people what their requirements are? Has that sort of been the system to educate? It's
been a real combined effort. So the software developers themselves have had a really big campaign. Those products that are ready now have actually been rolling out training through partners, etc. Accountants, bookkeepers, as you've said, are really key people in this rollout as well. So, and we've also been out with a number of webinars and live streams and different things, and we've got lots of good material on our website for people to have a look at. I do have to say that is something that the ATO has made a huge improvement in the last 6 to 12 months. Is there are so many different ways and touch points that you can get hold of the ATO. I was particularly impressed with a number of months ago you rolled out the ability for small businesses to make an appointment and set a time when they would like a call back, because you've obviously understood that we all work until stupid o'clock in the evening to get everything done, and that's been a fabulous development. You've obviously Ask Alex, which is a helpful way of navigating your way around the system, and I think the overhaul of the ATO website has been a really positive educational way of getting the information out there, because it's easier to search for what you need, and there's videos and there's a whole small business education section of the website, which is really helpful. Yeah, we've come a long way since tax pack, haven't we? Actually, I saw something celebrate the old tax pack the other day, but and through social channels as well. So clearly, we do a lot more too through things like LinkedIn and Facebook and things like that to get a message out as well. So, but you're right, we're doing a lot of video and live stream and webcast and different ways. Podcasts, the ATO's got its own podcast channel now as well, Tax Invoice. So, yeah, we know that people want to pick up information when they're on the run, and often that's when they're in their car on their way to their business. So that's right. And the reality is the absolute majority of small businesses want to do the right thing. They want to get themselves educated. They want to be doing the right thing not only by themselves but also for their employees. And that's what a lot of this single touch payroll rollout is about. Could you explain to me the importance of, why is it that the ATO is doing this essentially, and why has legislation come into place? What problem are you trying to solve? So this is something that's real-time reporting from payroll has been around for a while. It's something that the UK did through their real-time information system a few years ago. And there's a number of reasons for it. Certainly the first one is actually trying to look at reporting through natural business process. So recognising that, a really key part of any business is paying staff, and often they have systems there to actually support that process. And so rather than coming back and reporting to us at the end of the year through the payment summary annual report, and having to come up with those figures from scratch each time when they do their activity statement, we think we can we've build a process to leverage that through the natural business process of payroll, in effect. So certainly the first one is to streamline that experience and move away from rigid forms that have to be done at the end of the year and chasing people with payment summaries. You mentioned employees. There's some really important benefits here for employees. So one of the things that happens at the moment as a salary and wage earner is that you get your payment summary, or some still call a group certificate, at the end of the year, and you put that into your tax return, or you pre-fill it into your tax return, and then in some cases most people are expecting a refund. In some cases people end up with a surprise debt, so it's kind of that bill shock. And that could be because you're working 2 jobs and you've claimed 2 tax-free thresholds, not knowing that you shouldn't do that. It could be because you've got a higher education loan that's coming due because you've crossed a threshold. Bottom line is, through things like single touch payroll, with that visibility each payday of year-to-date tax amounts being paid and year-to-date salary and wages, we'll be able to actually give people a heads up early in the year to let them know that they're heading towards a debt and that they can do something about it by increasing their withholding, for example.
Or highlighting the fact that they do have, clearly, because of the way that you can see the calculations are working, they have claimed the tax-free threshold against 2 employees. What is going to be the response from the ATO in those sort of situations? Obviously, I imagine a softly approach to begin with, just to inform people.
Absolutely. So we're not changing, and it's not going to mandate that change to withholding. It's more to be helpful and say to people, hey, most people don't want to end up with a debt. In most cases, that's a surprise when they do. The other key one for an individual as well is the super guarantee. And so certainly one big part of the way when the government announced the extension of single touch payroll to smaller employers with those 19 or fewer, it's part of a super guarantee integrity package, and really aiming to target the $2.8 billion estimated super guarantee gap each year, which is a substantial amount of money. And at the moment, the issue is that we just don't have visibility of unpaid super. In a lot of cases, employees are just not well educated or not motivated even necessarily around their super until they discover that it hasn't been paid for a period of time. And often by the time they do that and come to us for help, that business has no longer got the money to pay that back, and that's the employee that gets dudded at the end of the day.
That's right, and I think I think we've all been in that position as employees where we don't monitor what's going into our super. There is a lot of trust there to assume that the right amount of super is being paid on time, and I think that's probably where that $2.8 billion shortfall is coming from.
Absolutely, and not only that, I think, and probably rightly so, people think what's on their payslip is actually getting paid each payday to the super fund, not realising that the employer doesn't have to pay that and only has to pay that each quarter. A lot of employers choose to pay monthly, but even still, people think their super's tracking away because they can see it listed on their payslip, but that doesn't mean it's actually going into their account. That's
not going to change, though. It's still only a quarterly requirement.
That's right. But what this gives us is visibility. So at the moment, that is actually it's an important point. So that is the only new field that's been reported to the ATO as part of single touch payroll. That's the super liability. So the employer needs to tell us each payday not just the salary and wage amounts and tax amounts, but also the super guarantee liability. And then we're getting more frequent reporting from the super funds. Currently, we get that reporting once a year on contributions. We'll get reporting within 10 days of each contribution amount going in, and that'll allow us to bring visibility and start to follow up much closer to real time with those employers who have missed a payment. And again, get ahead of that and say to people, hey, give them a nudge to say your super is due. You might want to actually make sure you get it paid.
And so that's one of the main aims for this single touch payroll rollout, is to help with the data matching. And I think there's a lot of concern out there with, well, what is it that the ATO can see? Has that been legislated? Is there anything they're going to try and find out about me that they don't have or should not have access to? Can you give people a little bit of reassurance around that whole data matching concept?
Absolutely, and probably an important message to start with is the first year of single touch payroll reporting is a transition year, and specifically we've said there's no penalties for that first year. It's really about settling in and helping people make this change. We recognise that it's a fairly significant change to payroll. Some have said in the industry it's the biggest change in 50 years to the payroll process. So we want to make sure that people have a good experience when they start reporting, and we're providing help and assistance, and they're not fearful of making a mistake in that reporting. So I certainly would assure people of that. Our interventions will be quite careful and considered. We've got a lot to learn as the ATO and as government on something that's quite different to traditional tax form reporting. We're used to forms that get completed, often go through a BAS agent or tax agent for assistance. and are reconciled before they actually get sent off to the office. With single touch payroll being reporting every week or fortnight or month, depending on your pay cycle, we understand that they're not going to go through just as rigorous. They don't need to go through just as rigorous a process, because we accept there's quite a flexible corrections framework, and we know that errors happen in payroll all the time. There's actually corrections that are flowing through. There's underpayments, there's overpayments. They get usually fixed up in the next pay period, and that's when they'll be reported to us as new year-to-date amounts. So there's a lot to learn from the ATO in using that kind of data and not overreacting to it. So we're going to be very considered and careful, particularly through learning this next 12 months, what that means, and our data matching and analytics programs. We won't be really gearing those up in a big way at all until we understand things a bit better and understand what is a true discrepancy and what's just something that's going to fix itself up.
That was one of the things that I was going to say I do like about single touch payroll, is that it's a moving beast. So although you might have one pay run that you've lodged, oh damn, I made a mistake, I've got to do it again, it's going to be picked up because it's the year-to-date figures that are those are important ones. And I like your reassurance about the fact that any big fluctuations are not going to suddenly raise a red flag and mean that you're going to get a call from the ATO saying, hey, hang on a second, why is it that that's changed and moved around so much? Because there are those fluctuations in the everyday bookkeeping of just the payroll, the nature of payroll, as you said.
And I hear those stories all the time. So when I go out talking a lot to business, a lot to talking to accountants and bookkeepers, and the one thing that keeps coming up is people say, oh, there's something funny or peculiar in my payroll, which when we report it to you, you're going to think I'm doing something wrong and you're going to pull me up on it. And so that message, has been well received, because, every payroll has its anomalies. People do different things in their payroll process. It's not, as I said, a traditional tax reporting. And we've really had to rethink a number of things around that, including things like declarations and authorisations as well.
I thought it might be interesting to talk today a little bit about demystifying of the process, because I know, speaking to small businesses, they think that the ATO is the one that makes the decisions about legislation and even timing and when things happen. Could you just explain in a really simplified way, who is it who makes these decisions? How does it trickle down through the ATO? And then how does it trickle all the way down to small business and the way that perhaps your customer service representatives are speaking to small business?
Sure. So, look, it is absolutely, single touch payroll is a government initiative. So the government the federal government. So the federal government's made a decision to proceed in the first instance, as I mentioned, with single touch payroll for what we call substantial employers, those with 20 or more employees. And that was legislated, where are we now, back last year, in terms of, actually the year before last, in terms of an omnibus bill that went through. The ATO is then asked to actually implement that legislation, and we have things like communications programs and provide a whole lot of support content. Importantly, with single touch payroll, we spent a lot of time, and people probably heard about it for a long time, thinking, how long is this going to take? Working with industry to design it, so making sure that we did live to that point of it being a natural business process. We recognise that reporting 52 or 26 times a year could be burdensome if it's actually not well designed. So we've made sure, and people have kept us honest around making sure there isn't anything onerous or new in there, that it's actually part of just doing your pay. So we do a whole lot of work around that, and work to a date. The small business extension was announced last year by government, so that was part, as I mentioned, of a super guarantee package. The government had a cross-agency committee looking at strategies to improve the super guarantee payment or reduce non-payment of super guarantee and deal with that problem. One of the recommendations from that committee was to extend single touch payroll to all employers. So the government looked at that report, made an announcement that they were intending to do that, and for that would start from 1 July 2019, which is obviously next year. And then it gets on a legislative program, so law needs to be drafted, the law changes that are required to bring that about. In the case of single touch payroll, there's not a lot of change required.
Because it's just a reporting.
It's building on what we already had, but also one of the things that, again, I like to say it's streamlining of the law. There's a head count in the current law that says on the 1st of April you need to count if you've got 20 or more employees. If you do, you have to report from July. In extending to smaller businesses, they're able to remove that head count from the law. So that's one of the changes that will go through. Then it's got to go through into the parliamentary process, House of Reps, into the Senate. and that's where that piece of law is at the moment. So it's still before Parliament. We've got an announced date, but at the moment just waiting for that to be considered by Parliament, see whether there's any changes to it, and then we'll be asked again to go out and communicate more broadly. So on the small business one, we've actually have had a number of small business who have decided to start reporting. There's nothing to stop them. There's no law required for them to start reporting under single touch payroll, and we've already had something like 16,000 small employers who have opted in because their software was available. So there's a few bits to it. We've also been out. We also have spent a lot of time the last couple of years working with all the software providers to make sure the products are updated to support this reporting as well.
And so that's why the 2-year lead time is so important for you, obviously, between when it's legislated or even the thought process of legislating it, making sure that we don't end up with these big rollouts that turn into little teeny-weeny ad hoc steps, because that's the danger, isn't it, that small business might know about the major change but then not know any incremental changes after that do affect them. So how do you suggest people find out the best way to find out and keep a finger on the pulse for all of these changes that affect small business in relation to the ATO? What's the best way of really keeping an eye on those things?
Look, there's a number of ways. One is the Small Business Newsroom, which I know we get really good feedback on. There's actually, you can subscribe basically there to receive the Small Business Newsletter.
And really easy to read newsletters, by the way. They're really approachable and easy to read.
It has a huge audience, that publication. So that's one way. Certainly keeping an eye on our website for STP. It's ato.gov/STP. But on top of that, we're also writing to all employers who are affected by the changes. We did a mail out last year. Actually, we did a couple of mail outs. We did one quite early just to give people a heads up that this change was coming. And then we did another one earlier this year. With smaller employers, we'll be doing the same thing. So we'll be sending out a letter to everyone to say, and not a traditional letter with a stamp, but mainly via email, just to say to people that this change is coming and what you need to do to get ready. Our key message will continue to be work with your software provider. Certainly understand that for smaller businesses, a lot of very what we would call micro businesses don't actually use a payroll product. They use all sorts of different things. Some still use cash books. Some still use Excel as their system of choice.
Some people just still use paper and pencil.
Yeah, a bit of that. So there's a variety of things, and that's something that we've been working with industry on as well, to look at what alternate reporting mechanisms we can come up with so that everyone's not forced to use payroll software. So there's a range of things there. Importantly, we're looking at how do we make sure that's a low cost process and that it isn't going to cost people a lot to actually start STP reporting.
And so the bottom line from that is really, if you are receiving communication from a body such as the ATO, it is education. It's about trying to help you do better business and make sure that you're doing the right thing and you're not doing the wrong thing by your employees or by yourself as well. So keep an eye on those pieces of documents and make sure, because I do notice quite a lot of times businesses have incorrect addresses with the ATO. Make sure that your mailing address, your email address, your points of communication with the ATO are up to date.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly, look to your trusted advisors, your accountants, your bookkeepers. They'll play a really big part, particularly in this, broadening to smaller businesses. We acknowledge there's a lot of small employers out there who will be coming across to STP over the next couple of years, and that will need to be staggered and sensible. And again, probably one of the biggest things we learnt through the bringing on of 20 or more is flexibility around the date. We had a lot of flexibility because very large payrolls have very complex processes and systems and therefore needed longer lead times to get ready. Some of the smaller businesses who had software found it quite easy to switch over. So there's a real variety of starting points for business, and we need to be quite flexible and have been about when people start their reporting.
Excellent. Look, we're going to take a quick break here on Small Biz Matters and come back after the break. Here we have John Shepherd from the ATO explaining to our listeners all about single touch payroll and the impact that it has on small businesses. You're listening to Triple H. We'll be back after this. So today we have John Shepherd, who is from the ATO, talking all about the big change that is coming or has started to be rolled out for businesses, which is single touch payroll. Now, just before the break, we were talking a little bit about how the ATO is working with small businesses to educate them and to roll this out and make sure that you've got all the information that you need to make sure that you're correct and you're compliant with what's required. There are a lot of hoops to jump through. I don't think anybody would argue with that, but there are good reasons why STP is being rolled out. And the most important one, of course, is making sure that employees are looked after, that the ATO is aware of what's happening with various employment situations, and also to make sure that you're paying super on time. And I know there's a lot of small business listeners out there who are saying, look, I do pay super on time, but there's also a lot of you who don't. So that is more about your liability that you hold for your employees. We need to think about that money not being ours, but actually part of the package of employment, really, John. And that's what this is all about. It's about making sure that all the stakeholders in a business, not just the owner, are looked after.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the big complaint we get from smaller businesses on this is, they're paying all their entitlements, and the guy down the road, though, they know people down the road who aren't, or there's stories about people who don't pay super or aren't doing the correct withholding, or, getting an easier ride, and they're not competing then on a level playing field. So,
and exactly, making it a fair contest, I guess, when it comes to making sure you're meeting all those requirements. I think what's interesting here is that you've worked very hard with software companies to make it as easy as possible. In my mind, when I think of the steps and what the action steps are that businesses have to take to roll this out, it's not much different from just issuing pay slips. Am I right? Is it really that simplistic? If you've got the software in place, it's just going to talk to the ATO and send all the information with every pay run?
There's a couple of changes. You are right. So the design has been looked at in that way. So, and I've seen some of the screens, obviously, and how they work. And there's just a slide add-on there. It's single touch. So there's that extra submission step. There are a couple of things you need to be aware of. So, firstly, particularly with a lot of the products, we're using some of the cloud-based accounting products. You've got to do an upfront notification to the ATO of a software ID. So you can either do that through what we call Access Manager, or you can actually call our call centre and actually provide that software ID through to the ATO. That's a one-off notification, which actually says that your software will be sending your reports through.
But then again, not hard. It's not difficult.
No, not difficult, just a one-off. It's just something that people sometimes forget. They jump on. It's so easy to start reporting. They just jump on and start reporting.
That's right. But the good software companies will make sure that they do set that all up properly. And I believe that they're actually requesting numbers to come back. So it's a single phone call. Yes. And I imagine no wait times on those phone calls?
No, it's pretty good. No, so we've got a pretty streamlined process. We've also streamlined for BAS and tax agents to be able to provide that on employers' behalf as well when they start reporting. So certainly that's one thing to be mindful of. I think the other one is making sure, and I mentioned cloud-based products, but a lot of people there's a bunch of people who are still using desktop accounting products or payroll products. Need to be mindful that you can't submit these STP reports in the way you currently do your payment summary annual report, which is an upload through our portal. That technology is kind of old technology. You now need to have a direct connection either through your payroll product or through a third party to be able to send that data to the ATO. So that is a key change, and that's what will allow that data to be sent each payday. It's more systems talking to systems, and it also allows then the messages, any confirmation message, to come back to your software as well. So
those of us who are using desktop-based software up until this point that doesn't have any online communication with the ATO, for example, there are add-ons that people can purchase, which are pieces of software that I guess connect in, and then they communicate to the ATO.
That's correct. So there's different ways. So if you work with each of the payroll products will have a slightly different way of achieving that. It's important that you communicate with them about how they plan to bring you onto STP. And work with them. In some cases, they're providing those add-ons. In some cases, they might send you to a list of third-party providers who can do that in your behalf as well. And
is there a notification that we should be looking for, a stamp or a logo that says STP ready? Are they allowed to use that without actually being ready?
No, there is some agreed terms, and one of those is STP ready. They do need to go through rigorous testing processes to make sure their software can connect to us, and there's also a very robust security framework that sits around all of this, and they need to go through some fairly rigorous assessments to actually get approved to be able to connect to ATO systems.
And there's obviously a lot of industry-specific software that people use. So if you're not sure, check with your accountant or your bookkeeper, and also maybe check with your professional association, because if they're the ones recommending this software, they're going to make sure that's got that approval and it's all good to go. I guess the worst-case scenario is you don't want to be thinking that you're doing the right thing and you're sending all this data off and it's not reaching the ATO? Is it maybe worth double-checking?
No, absolutely. Just as I said, most of the major products are now ready, and they've got a bunch of material on their website in that regard. there's something like over 100 products that are ready. A couple of the larger ones are very close to be ready, but for your small business audience, all of the products you would recognise have products available and are rolling those out at the moment.
Could I ask, with the relation to STP, it's really just a reporting mechanism, but does this come under the self-assessment banner? Like, is this something that's considered something that you are responsible for as a business to send the data to the ATO? Is it one of those?
Absolutely. So, you do have an obligation. There's a new obligation in the STP law to do that sending every payday. It's the date on which you pay your staff is the new due date for submitting that. So, it's really, and there isn't a lot of new data in there from what you would currently do in your payment summary and your report. But importantly, it's more frequent. And as we said, for each employee, it's year-to-date amounts. So
exactly. And I would like to mention as well, you spoke earlier about the fact that we're all used to advising the ATO and our BASs with our wages and salaries and our pay-as-you-go withholding, but we haven't been telling the ATO on that frequency about super, but that's one of the things that needs to be included.
So the super liability is the new amount, and also the fact that we're getting employee level data every payday, which we only get that once a year now, right? So when you do your BAS, you only give us your rolled up employer level amounts. You don't take it down to an employee level. So
let's talk about those numbers, because I think that whole, whenever we put a threshold or a number on things, people do get a little bit confused. Can I give you a couple of examples of employers that I know of that might think, I'm not sure if I fall under this. So take, for example, people who use a lot of talent in the, say, film and television industry. They're already aware that they need to bring these people on as employees onto their payroll system, but they're only using them once in a year. Those levels are going to fluctuate quite a lot. How can they determine whether or not they're supposed to be using single-touch payroll if it moves around so much?
So I mentioned earlier the headcount date, so the 1st of April each year, and again, I'll talk about the existing legislation because the extension to small business isn't legislated, so let's put that to one side. In the current law, there's a headcount date on the 1st of April where you count your employees and determine whether or not you have 20 or more. For casual employees, what we've struck is that you count those casual employees that you've had working or paid in the month of leading up to 1st of April, so the month of March. If they didn't work in the month of March, they're therefore not counted in your headcount. And if that takes you you're under 20, you don't therefore need to report under STP. You can opt in, but you're not required to report. So we tried to be pretty pragmatic about that. If, though, that period of March was an absolute peak period for you, and let's say the example we got was the Easter show.
Yes, I was thinking anything to do with Easter.
Yeah, so you've got the Easter show and you've got all your employees come on just for that event. Yeah. So you struck it lucky and you got 30 employees just around that weekend of 1st of April. We would say that you could, under the rules we struck, you could actually apply for an exemption because that was the only period of the year where you had 20 or more and it was just unlucky. So
how hard is it to apply for an exemption?
Quite straightforward. So there's an exemption form on our website. You would just fill in and say, well, I only had 20. I only had them for that weekend.
Yeah.
Could I...
Could you do it over the phone? Does it have to be a form?
It is a form, I think, on our website, and it's pretty easy to fill in, though.
Okay.
So it's quite straightforward, and that would be quite a straightforward process. It's basically... Actually, I should change that. Actually, I think where we ended with the exemption on that was it's self-assessed.
Right.
So it's basically you don't even need to send it in.
Yeah,
so you
awesome.
basically do your count, keep your record of what you had. You don't even need to send it to us. But the process is laid out on our website. So.
And there's a magic word you just used there, record.
Yes.
That is so important that whatever it is that you're doing, whether you're using cloud-based or any software or no software at all, you've got to have some sort of a record that can be used as evidence for X number of employees that you had at this time, whereas compared to
so
noise.
how was it you came to that decision that you weren't required to report? Just keep a record of that with your other records and you've got no problems at all.
Having said that, though, as you keep mentioning, and as I'm going to keep saying this as well, because I really don't think it's that difficult a hurdle if you've got the systems in place, opting in means that the ATO is almost beginning to learn the fluctuations that happen with your business and your industry anyway, and so it's not such a big shock to the system when later on you're forced to do it because it's legislated. It's
absolutely. And look, it is designed to be quite simple, and it's designed to give benefits over time. So I mentioned one of the things is you don't need to provide payment summaries to your employees at the end of the year.
It's such a busy time anyway.
We will, over time, though, the government will be looking to how they use that data to replace place other reporting obligations. So clearly every business goes through all these different statistical surveys we were talking about earlier. There's things like the Department of Social Security come out and check or ask you to provide income statements for certain people. There's things like termination statements that need to be provided. All of those things, we think over time, single touch payroll can start to be used towards those and just start to strip away some of the burden. And I think the holy grail for those bigger small businesses is payroll taxes. If we could actually do something around making that process easier as well, that's certainly not something we might head to in the future. To
working with other government departments to make sure that those things are accurately reported as well.
And you give your employees that great experience of having, not having the bill shock at the end of the year, getting confidence their super's been paid. I haven't talked much about where we display the data. That will be displayed as part of ATO Online in MyGov. And so, again, there's probably a few misnomers around MyGov for those that haven't been there for a while. It was, early on, people found it a bit hard to use. You had to have a unique number that you actually had to put aside and key in each time you used it. That's changed. You can use your email address now. The actual layout and usability has improved a lot with feedback over time. So, and there's a bunch of different government services that people access through MyGov. So we'll be displaying all of that data as it's reported by the employers. That salary and wage information, tax information, the super information will be displayed in MyGov and visible then to the employees. Importantly, the employer also gets a view in the tax agent of a summary of their submissions, but importantly the source of truth for that data is still the employer's software, and until next time you report, we recognise, as I said, that may have changed. So
let's talk a little bit about obviously we've talked a lot about the employer's obligations, what they have to do, but I think it's important, whose responsibility is it to tell the employees that they need to have, because this is one of the things that it's a must. Employees now must have a MyGov account in order to access that information, because payment summaries are going to be phased out, and the only way they're going to get that information for the purposes of their own tax is to have a MyGov account.
Or through a tax agent. So again, I do get asked that question, are you going to mandate MyGov for individuals, because lots of people still don't have an account?
Yes.
We can't, there's no law that says your employees have to get a MyGov account. Basically, if they want to access their, and as you said, what we would now call income statement, previously called a payment summary. Going back 20 years, it was called a group certificate, but everyone still calls it that. I love that, the fact that it's still called a group certificate after 20 years, and I keep saying we're finally getting rid of the group certificate.
It's all because we're so used to having uni jobs and running around to all our different employees asking for group certificates.
Even some of the younger employees that have started in our organisation still call them group certificates, so it's been passed on from generation to generation. But no, so we won't force that. The data will still be available through pre-fill, whether you do your own. If you do your own tax return, in MyTax, you have to have a MyGov account to do that. But if you use a tax agent, the pre-fill will still come through from STP.
And the tax agent can access that information.
Yeah. So, I think, that, again, it's one of those misnomers, I suppose. A lot of people like to print off their payment summary, but just think about last time you needed it to use it for something. Maybe if you had a bank loan or things like that, they might ask for proof of income. And again, you'll be able to print that off. So if you want to get a copy of that, yes, you'll have to get a MyGov account to print that off. But in most cases, people will get their tax and income data through pre-fill.
Excellent. Look, we're just going to take another quick break here on Small Biz Matters. When we come back after this, I'd like to talk to you about that data and how secure it is and whether people should have any concerns. You're listening to Triple H 100.1 FM and Small Biz Matters with Alexi Boyd. We'll be back after this. And welcome back to Small Biz Matters with Alexi Boyd. We are in the studio today with John Shepherd from the ATO, who's talking all things single touch payroll. Now, just before the break, we were talking a little bit about the process and working out and determining how many employees you have, at what point you need to work that out, and the process of reporting this information on a cyclical basis. And I think one thing that people need to understand is the cycle of this is not quarterly. It's not BAS, but it's actually per pay run. So if you are paying your employees weekly, this is the information you're going to be giving out weekly. And that it's a cumulative, I guess, for want of a better word. It's the year-to-date figures, really, that the ATO are focusing on. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, that's right. And look, I think, as I've said a couple of times, with the legislation still to go through for smaller businesses, we have been looking at some practical ways, particularly for those micro businesses, could report this information, and that might include, some transitional arrangements as well. So importantly, we recognise for some who don't have systems, that a shift to payday reporting is a big change. So we have been working with some stakeholders around some ideas that might help them transition there over time. So
when you say you're speaking to stakeholders, is that professional associations in industries that typically do that?
Absolutely, bookkeepers, accountants, bookkeepers who really deal with these kind of things all the time. So we've got quite a clear picture of reality in terms of how some of those businesses operate, and the fact they come and effectively with their shoebox once a quarter to do their BAS. So this is a big change. So we're working also carefully through ways that we could transition people like that over time.
Yeah.
And that would be supported, by that kind of process where they go to their accountant or bookkeeper perhaps.
Is there a firm deadline for those people who are listening to this and going, I haven't got anything in place, I do pay my employees, I do pay super, I'm doing all that properly, but I don't really have a cyclical proper way of doing pay? Is there a deadline that those people need to work to?
Look, not a deadline because we haven't got the law. So, although we've got an announcement, until we see some legislation that actually lays out this requirement and the clear dates, there isn't really a deadline. I think it's something to be mindful of, but not to panic about at this stage. Just wait and see how that lays out.
But keep an eye on the ATO website.
We will write out to people once this actually does get legislation. We'll write out with some very clear instruction about what you should consider and do next, and what the best steps are and what the options are, because importantly we're looking at options for micro businesses, not just payroll software, as I said, and that will include some kind of easy and simple and cheap ways to get this data into.
So let's talk about those micro businesses and data concerns, because a lot of people, both employees and employers, might be saying, look, I don't want this data shared, I don't want this information going more regularly to the ATO because I'm worried about how my data is going to be treated. What could you say to just allay those people's concern? Where is the data, and where is it sitting, and is it safe?
So it's reported into the ATO. As I mentioned, we've done some very rigorous security assessments from an end-to-end perspective, from the software right through to the ATO process, to make sure that is secure. We're bound by some very strict privacy laws about how that data can be shared with other agencies. There's not much change actually happening to those, other than some of those agencies who get data from the ATO currently. For example, Centrelink, we would look over time to how we could provide that data more frequently, again to achieve outcomes for employees of not getting overpaid benefits, which is a really key thing.
One of the broad things I was going to ask about as well, it sounds as though the data is coming into the ATO. You're getting data from employers, you're getting data from the super companies. It's more that there's incoming data rather than outgoing. Would that be a really
certainly
good way?
A lot of that data is for tax and super purposes, so therefore is actually looked after very closely by the ATO and guarded very closely. There are legislative the ability for us to share that data with certain agencies, but that's very tightly bound and very carefully managed about what's shared and how often it's shared and at what level of detail. So those things haven't shifted because of STP. Those tight kind of guidelines are still there, basically. And for us to get changes to those, we've tend to have got to go and get either legislative change in a lot of cases to make that happen.
When you're talking about sharing that data with other agencies, for example?
Yeah, if it goes outside of the current agencies that we're sharing with. And there's not a lot of agencies that actually can get tax data at the moment. That is all fairly tight.
That's good. One thing I would say is that I know that a number of the software companies are instigating something called two-step authentication. Now, just from someone who works a lot with admin and bookkeeping with businesses, anybody listening out there, I would strongly encourage turning on two-step authentication, not just for your accounting software, but in fact anything that has your sensitive data in it. So those of you who are listening, have a think about the last time you received information from your accountant. Was it in an email? Was your entire tax document attached to that email? If so, your email should be double secured with a two-step authenticator into your phone. Just remember how much data of yours, personal data, is on your phone. And also think about the data that you hold for your employees as well. My golden rule is anything that has a tax file number, a date of birth, a name and an address, or any or all of those pieces of information combined, should be somewhere that has a double security wall. And obviously we can't be 100% secure, but two-step authentication is a great first step.
Yeah, and that's not just about STP, of course. That's something we're seeing a general step up in because of things like fraudulent attacks and things that people are experiencing. So STP doesn't change that, absolutely. So whether your data is at rest, on your desktop computer, you need to have some kind of security over it, obviously.
Exactly. And it's not just a simple matter of having a password on your laptop. You need to strengthen that a little bit more because we as employers have that obligation, don't we, to keep the data that we hold of our employees safe.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely right.
Let's talk about so we've talked about the process step by step on how to determine whether or not single touch payroll applies to you now. Once it's 19 or fewer employees, what's the deadline at the moment for the start date?
So as I said, there's no real deadline. There's an announcement from government, which was 1 July 2019. But until we see legislation, let's just see when that comes out.
But there is the option to opt in.
But there was always the option for any employer to start reporting as soon as they've got software that's enabled.
Once you opt in, you can't opt out though.
No, you can. I think if you're under 19, under 19 or fewer, you can stop and still go. You go back to the old system though, which is provision of payment summaries, etc. So. There is that flexibility still, but you can't be compelled because the law can't compel you to if you're under 19,
Understood.
19 or fewer at the moment. So,
and talking about end of year finalisation, so obviously as we mentioned, you go along. Sometimes you make changes to pay runs, you make changes to, but sometimes accountants come in at the end of the year and say, "Oh, we're going to make this large change." How does that work for the end of the year information, which would normally be picked up by a payment summary?
Yep, so there's an end of year finalisation service in your software which connects back into the ATO to say we need to make a change. We found this error or discrepancy at the end of the year. We want to add to this employee, that employee. It might be that you want to put your FBT in at the end of the year. That's okay. That doesn't have to happen every payday, and it doesn't in a normal business process. Salary sacrifice amounts to go on normally into your payment summary. They can all be added through that finalisation service at the end of the year. And importantly, until you send us that finalisation event, we can't release your employees' income details into their tax return. So that's the equivalent of sending your payment summary. You send in that finalisation event, and then that allows us to release that data for pre-fill.
And if there hasn't been any changes or you don't need to make any amendments, it is just literally flicking a switch and going, OK, I'm done.
We're done. Yep. And that might be on the last pay. When you do your last pay, you might then send all your finalisation events and say they're all done, and therefore, just on the end of the year, all of those income statements are actually available then to your employees. Could
I ask, is there an obligation for employers to tell their employees that they're doing single touch payroll?
Not so much an obligation on them. I think we're providing lots of good information out and fact sheets and things there for employees. So I would encourage employers to actually share that information on. But importantly, at the moment, there isn't a lot for employees to see still as we're kind of ramping this up. And what we've said to employers is to kind of pick the best time when they've started reporting and got this up and running, then it's a good time to start sharing that information with their employees.
Just as in terms of this is the new reporting mechanism that I'm doing, This is the ATO and this is what they've said that I must do. If you have any concerns, let me know.
Yeah, and at the end of the year, and I think one of the things we've said is we might just need a bit more communication at the end of each financial year for the next 10 years to say, hey, you're not going to get your payment summary from your employer, because I think each year that's so ingrained in people to come and grab their payment summary.
Well, if people are still using the words group certificate, then
it's just
clearly a bit of a process thing.
So
that
I say to people, we'll tell them once and they'll remember, right? And they all look at me and go, no.
That's
not the case.
In the real world.
Yeah, that's right.
So I think the last question I just wanted to ask you was about the real ground level guys at the ATO who deal in the call centre and talk to employees and employers' concerns. They're obviously fully across this, and when people ring up and say, what do I do? there's going to be someone really helpful on the end of the line, because I think that person-to-person contact is what the ATO is definitely improving on.
Yeah.
Is that something that's going to continue for single-touch payroll? Is there a dedicated single-touch payroll line?
Not a dedicated line, so you just come through the normal numbers and you'll get routed to somebody who can help you with your single-touch payroll questions. Again, we've worked with them to make sure we've got good level of information, and that's updated all the time with the latest tips and traps, or, you know, what are some of the issues that people are having where we see a problem. So you're right, our call centre people are fantastic, and if there's something that gets too hard or really complicated, it'll get escalated to an expert who can then get back to the employer with some more detailed information. So
apart from the call centre, could you just take me through where the best touch points are, where people can find out more information about this rollout?
First one we always say is through your software provider. They have some very dedicated and great information, usually on their websites, particular to your product and where it's up to and what their rollout looks like. There's our website, which is ato.gov.au/STP. There's some great fact sheets.
And videos too.
Videos, webcasts, lots and lots of good stuff to have a look at to get your head around. There's also an employer guide there, which you can download. And the employer guide has all of those kind of detail about what to do in single-touch payroll in different situations, and how you handle finalisation at end of year, all those sort of things we spoke about. And then obviously your tax practitioner or bookkeeper is going to have access, often through their association, to some great material as well. All the associations have done a great job with this in terms of getting some really clear information out to support them and support employers through this as well.
And you've got the small business newsroom that you mentioned as well. Again, I'm just going to give that a bit of a plug because it is incredibly accessible and easy to read. Those can come out in via email, or you can just go in and check out what the latest changes are. So hopefully this isn't going to be too much of a moving beast. We know basically what's happening. It's beginning to be rolled out. It is going to affect anybody who employs staff. I would just note as well, it also has an effect on people who are directors who only employ themselves. That's an important thing to note. You still have to be single-touch payroll compliant, which is very important. And look, I think that the ATO is doing a really good job of trying to get the information out there as well to small business owners. It's not such a big deal. It's going to be fine. It's
not such a big deal. And if you've got concerns, as I said, or you need more time, there's information on the website about deferrals and things as well. So as I said, we're being quite flexible, acknowledging that everyone's got different challenges, got other things going on in their business, all sorts of reasons which might mean they need a bit extra time, particularly if if they're in that 20 or more group at the moment. But we'll have the same approach when we get to small business.
Exactly. Look, and thank you very much for coming on the program today, John, because I think having this face-to-face discussion is really valuable. And we talked about the rollout. We talked about how the ATO is going to be advising people, and some really practical strategies today to get that single-touch payroll compliance happening in your business.
I really appreciate you having me. I love coming out and talking to business particularly. So having being able to talk on your station has been fantastic. So thank you.
Thank you, John. Now, of course, if you missed any of today's program, you can catch up on smallbizmatters.com.au, where you can listen to up to 200 of our local podcasts, and we're also rolling them all out on iTunes as well via the Small Biz Matters. I nearly said Single Touch Payroll podcast.
Let's rename it. Let's get the word out a bit further.
Small Biz Matters on iTunes is now available as well, where you can listen to the entire podcast. Next week on Small Biz Matters, we're going to have another fantastic guest. Oh, that was a bit coming in, George Michael, onto my show. We're going to have another fantastic guest on Small Biz Matters as well next week, so make sure you join us. And obviously lots of experts coming on the show too. If you've got piece of expertise you'd like to share, get in touch and we'll have you on the program as well. You've been listening to Small Biz Matters, the half-hour program where you work on your business rather than in it. My name's Alexi Boyd. I'll see you all next week.